Hi, good evening. Today is Friday, August 13th. Let's start with COVID news. In Israel, for example, COVID cases are up 288% year over year. What's interesting about this is that a year ago, in August of 2020, 0% of people were vaccinated. And today, over 95% of people in Israel over 60 years old are vaccinated. And now they're getting triple vaccinated. And yet COVID cases have increased. They're almost 3 times over from last year. So it's interesting how those statistics have been completely ignored. And we just trusting the science of different kind, I guess. And in US, we have more mandates again for vaccines and masks and passports. In some places, they're actually mandating double masks for people. And even in Florida, where I was saying that it's relatively free, we were planning to go to a concert, and we just received an email from Ticketmaster saying that in order to show up for that concert, which is outdoor, completely outdoor on a lawn, we have to show either proof of vaccination or proof of not having COVID, and you have to wear masks. So needless to say, I'm not going to such concert. It's just ridiculous to sit outside in Florida in the heat in a mask. No thanks. So it seems like they're tightening restrictions everywhere, and Biden administration is actually discussing right now mandating COVID vaccines for interstate travel. But they're worried that this will be too polarizing for the moment. Too polarizing, that's all they could say. I mean, beyond ridiculousness, this could produce such a massive halt in all of the supply chain, trucking industry, and everything else. It's already under strain. And so if the Biden administration does that, it's going to produce such a bottleneck everywhere that I hope they have enough common sense left to not do that.
Every totalitarian government in history is always, they've never said, well, we're imposing these restrictions on your freedom because you don't deserve to have freedom. It's always for your safety, right? For your safety, for peace, to prevent these these people from stirring up society and creating disorder and so on. It's always stated in terms of a virtue, right?
Right, exactly. But in this case, this was just the supply chain is already under strain. You just can't compromise it any further, especially now that we see again the inflation data and the housing data came in this week, just basically getting from bad to worse. After a record high of 7.3% year over year in June, PPI was expected to moderate lightly, but instead it went up to 7.8. So up 1% month over month and up 7.8 year over year. Those are not trivial numbers. And core PPI also rose 0.9% month over month, almost doubling over the expectations. And now it's at a record 6.1 year over year. So on the housing front, US home prices are rising at the fastest pace on record, with median prices soaring almost 23% from a year earlier. So those record high prices make the housing even more unaffordable to people, even though the rates are very low. They just can't offset the increase of the prices. So whatever the Fed is doing, trying to help the housing, is actually having the opposite effect. And today we had consumer sentiment survey came out, and 5 to 10 year inflation expectations rose to 3% from 2.8. It's the highest since 2011. And so, of course, it's not a surprise that we got this lowest sentiment in 10 years. Headline number went down from 81 to 70. This is the huge drop. It's one of the biggest drops on record. And now the sentiment number is weaker than in April of the COVID crisis. So obviously the normal people are You can't blame them. They feeling the prices at the gas stations and supermarkets, food, housing, shelter, used cars, etc. And now with the new resurgence of the virus, vaccines not working, more lockdowns, masks, it's like a never-ending nightmare. And so only 32% of consumers thought that the economy would improve, as opposed to 45 from last month and 50 in June. So as the stimulus checks are wearing off, people are finally awakening to the reality of inflation high and not going down. Even if the inflation stops increasing, like we were saying, it still will stay at this high level, high baseline level for people. Biden administration is being blamed for it. So we'll see what they will do to try to moderate it. Maybe they will finally force Fed chair to raise the rates, but that would be also not necessarily good if this is the beginning of a deceleration in the economy, as the consumer as the consumer interest in buying products also has dropped. Nobody wants to buy super expensive houses, cars, and everything else, especially as they're run out of stimulus checks. But bonds don't care about any of this inflation data. And we could see that the 30-year bonds were up over 1% today and reversed for the week, and probably will continue next week as well.
Well, what there was also a report that came out yesterday, and it was the CAS Freight Index report, which shows that it's sort of a prediction. Is both current conditions in terms of shipping prices, but also an expectation of the future. And and this is with all of the seasonal adjustments and so on, is that we're seeing, let's see some pretty big changes, like although the freight index went down in terms of what's being shipped actually went down, the prices were, the cost of shipping was 43% higher than in 2020 and 23% higher than in July 2019. So we're seeing big increases in the cost of shipping, despite the fact that the amount being shipped is dropping. So it's I think this is yet another indication of inflation.
And this may even get worse because now China has shut down some of the ports as well. One of the major ports is shut down. It's hard to understand if it's temporary because of COVID or.
Yes, it was because of COVID. It was because one person at one of the staff there had COVID. And one person, they shut down the second largest port in the world.
Nice. The COVID insanity just wouldn't end, it seems, and we're going in a loop, and it's like an endless spiral. But like I said, the stocks don't care. S&P 500 had a very narrow day today, which traded an 8-point range on a very low volume for the whole day, made another new all-time high of 44.63. And what was unusual about it, that we have crossed the 44.50 Sojo level that Victor was expecting to come, but we crossed it pretty much without any back and forth, and just like it didn't exist. And the pullback that I was expecting this week, obviously it didn't happen. And well, perhaps next week, right? And we maybe will test 44.50 next week, just as a bare minimum. But I think that the pullback will be slightly deeper than that. But as long as we stay above 44.50, 4,500 is the next target there. And the vol trigger level is about 44.10. So to test that level would be nothing out of extraordinary, given that, as we discussed before, we didn't even have 5% pullback for. And so I still think that the risks of S&P 500 pullback are still elevated, relatively speaking. And one other strange thing today was that Russell closed down almost 1%, while S&P 500 made new highs, and NASDAQ also didn't make new highs and traded in the range of last week. So that also just sends a little more warning signs. S&P 500 is up 20% year to date. And as we discussed, this low consumer confidence level and low plans of purchase, even Apple has warned that the demand is going to go down. But so I would still expect some reaction from S&P 500 next week to that consumer sentiment, especially if retail sales confirm that drop.
Yeah, the one thing I would say was pretty interesting to watch this week was the action in some of the pharma stocks that have vaccines, like Pfizer, really has rallied very sharply over the last 3 weeks, from 40 up to 48, so 20% rally. It's not a crypto level rally, but it's a nice rally still. And then some of the others like Moderna.
Of course, Moderna, we talked about the elevated parabolic move in that stock, and now it's down 100 points or around 20% just in 2 days.
Right. And I think of Novavax as kind of the anti-Moderna in a way, because it seems to rally when Moderna pulls back and vice versa. And that was up another 4% today, so pretty nicely. It's had a bunch of gaps up this week, or 3 gaps up this week. It tends to be a fairly thinly traded stock, as you can tell by the daily action. It just has a lot of these gaps, but it's interesting to see this. I think that definitely the COVID news is driving more interest in these stocks and more price volatility. Yeah.
Right. And also dollar and gold had a very interesting move this week. Well, we talked about gold having this flash crash Sunday night, and it seemed to have not only recovered all of it, but it's actually closed up for the week. Right. And so it looks, to me, it looks bullish. Gold looks bullish right now. Maybe it will try to at least catch up a little bit to digital gold, Bitcoin.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'd also point out that although even at that flash crash low, which was like around 1680, I think, or maybe a little bit below, it didn't break this, this previous low either. And so it kind of held that low, whereas silver, maybe it's also bullish, but not quite as bullish as gold, I wouldn't say. And it did break this previous low where gold made a higher low.
Right, and US dollar has reversed significantly. Instead of breaking out through that month level, we have a very large reversal day today, and so perhaps it's the beginning of the continuation of the down move for the dollar. As kind of maybe slightly tying into this, another notable news this week was that how fast Taliban took over Afghanistan after the US withdrawal. It shows the complete lack of any thinking in the US foreign policy continuously for decades. And Taliban is about to take Kabul, and US embassy, it's partly evacuated. And US is actually asking Taliban to spare the US embassy. This is, I don't know how to say it any other way, but it's just such an unbelievable embarrassment for the Biden administration to have wasted 20 years and over $2 trillion, and of course, not to mention thousands of lives lost, and just to have this debacle that our embassy is not even protected. The worst part is nobody's held accountable. Not generals, not politicians, not diplomats, not the intelligence agencies, the military-industrial complex, the academics, the so-called elites, the professionals who always know better. You know, we're uneducated plebs here, but they all know what's the better foreign policy. So where are they now? Who is accountable for this? and certainly not the press, who were cheerleading us into this war. And so over $2 trillion later, and countless of lives lost. And now where we are, Taliban took over the Afghanistan army that we spent almost $1 trillion of training in less than a month. And they're going to take all Kabul probably by 9/11, which would be quite symbolic.
Well, and not to mention that during the, what was it, during the 70s, or sorry, during the 80s, we were funding the Taliban. What now we call Taliban, we call them the Mujahideen back then, but they're the same people. And the same, pro-Islamist kind of, it's a religious party, right? And in Iran, we want to make deals with them, and Afghanistan, they're the personification of evil. And right. We were just funding them, whatever, 30 years ago, we were funding them. They were
we're still funding them now, because they have just captured all of our helicopters, drones, trucks, ammunition, all of it that we have given to Afghan army apparently is now captured by Taliban, and Afghan army is surrendering in droves. This was all expected and predicted years ago, and yet here we are, and it's just an embarrassment.
It was something like at least $1 trillion for Afghanistan over
no, actually over $2.2 trillion.
Amazing.
Overall. And so, no wonder crypto is rallying, because like you keep saying, it's a complete failure of US government trust into the US government, because they can't handle their own COVID war. And every war the US starts, whether it's the war on drugs, the COVID, the poverty, the cancer, Afghanistan, Iran, Iraq, Libya, Syria, every single war has been a failure. I can't think of any war we have won.
Well, all of these wars, though, they weren't fought for any purpose other than this idea. Although all the wars that you mentioned, well, maybe Vietnam, that different minds or ideology or reasons, but all of the ones that have been fought pretty much since the early 90s have all been under this idea that people of the world, they are eager for democracy and the Western style liberties, American style, shopping malls and so on. And they want 500 cable channels and shopping malls and so on. And they look at, on the other hand, they look at how America lives and the social breakdown that we have here. And they say, no, thanks. Well, we'd rather live under a theocracy than live under that. And I mean, in a sense, I don't know if I blame them to some degree. It's I mean, I wouldn't want to live under a theocracy, but on the other hand, if you're a traditional person, what would your choice be?
Well, it seems to be either oligarchy or theocracy, and oligarchy by itself in America is reducing freedoms. Right. So if there is a war that needs to be fought, it needs to be fought within America, because we have less democracy and less freedom than some of the other countries in the world who are, like Belarus, for example, considered tyrannical. But at least there is no vaccination mandates, masks, passports, etc.
Right, and then in a country or a city-state like Singapore, where, I mean, let's say 30 years ago, nobody would claim that Singapore is this beacon of freedom in the world. It is a paternalistic state compared to what we have in the what we traditionally had in the United States. I don't know. I don't think now, because they didn't have any mandates or anything like that, vaccines, but from the very beginning, they do contact tracing and things like that, but they never had any lockdowns. They never had any of the mandates. And if people want to wear masks, they wear masks, or the same goes for Sweden. And they never had any lockdowns. Why are we less free than some of these countries. It's
Right. It's amazing that the amount of freedom that America has lost just in the last 10 years with freedom of speech. Like I said, Trump, former president, is banned from all of the platforms. So what freedom are we spreading around the world? What democracy when we have very limited here, and it's becoming more and more restrictive? And speaking of Trump, there are rumors that he's planning to run in 2024. So that should be interesting. I'm personally all for it. At least entertain me, because nothing else is coming out of Washington that's positive. So entertainment is all I'm hoping for.
Yeah, it's like how do you is maybe the same thing that people were thinking in 2016. How do you shake things up? I mean, this is unsustainable. It's untenable. How do you just shake it up as much as possible?
Right. And I personally hope that DeSantis does not run and stay in Florida, because I rather he were governor of Florida. I think it's more productive than to be a president, which is mostly a position without power. It seems it's.
Well, yeah, he's certainly talked about as a potential candidate, and even I guess Tim Scott, the senator from South Carolina, was also sort of in the news as being considered. But he's been in the Senate. This is his second term, so maybe he's politically too new. And there are even some people that say that the fact that he's a bachelor, never been married, and so on, this has some significance. That people don't like to elect a president that's not married. No.
But anyway, let's get back to crypto. It had an amazing week on the heels of all of those crazy news that's coming out. Cryptos has been rallying, what, 4 straight weeks?
Yeah, it's now 4 straight weeks up. Actually, 5 straight weeks up for most of crypto. Bitcoin had a bit of was slower to rally, but I think now its rally is well underway. And it's back above 47,000, which I think is really bullish. It pushed higher than this very temporary high that it had this last week. Pushed also this last week when on Tuesday we talked about how it went back above the 200-day moving average, which I consider to be kind of in full bear line, and it's crossed well back above that, and if I could see it continuing to rally here, with the next real resistance being around 50,000. And then Ethereum also had a great week. It spent most of the week kind of pausing underneath this 3,200 level, and it seems to broke above that, but it pretty much the last 3-4 days it traded above that, just couldn't stay above that level. And so if it can stay above that level and then retest that breakout, I think that could be also pretty bullish for Ethereum. But then there's some others that I guess we had talked about. Dogecoin,
Right.
that kind of has rallied pretty nicely. It was slow to rally, and then late last week it had, I guess that was Sunday, it had a really nice rally, and it's rallied pretty sharply since then. And then, but maybe it's like the number 6 or 7 coin, Cardano, has had a great week. Right. Just up a little over 10% today, but it's had several days this week where it's pushed pretty hard, and they are anticipated to launch. It's been in existence for several years, but they're launching smart contracts soon, so they'll be able to have. They claim to compete with Ethereum, but as they're so far behind in timing that it will take a lot of work for them to get there. But it's still the idea that they're playing in this space creates excitement, and but it's rallied really nicely against Ethereum and Bitcoin if you look at those charts. So it's outperformed pretty much everything. And then some of these like synthetics had a really nice day today. So these are some of the DeFi coins. Curve, some of these are just having great weeks, a great week. And there's still some that are lagging, but the key ones like Uniswap or synthetics, those are doing really well. Yearn, I guess they're all right. Maybe it's some resistance, but I could see it break through. Coinbase had, I would note that they blew away their earnings estimate, something like tripled what their estimated earnings were, and they rallied really nicely, almost up to 300 on the day their earnings were announced, but then they pulled back really sharply yesterday.
Yeah, that was surprising. Why such a deep pullback on such great earnings?
Well, I think that it was based on that it seems odd to say this, but this was but Bitcoin pulled back, and Bitcoin and Ethereum and everything else pulled back, and it was a good 6-7% pullback. So Coinbase was pulling back kind of in line with that, but I think it was an overreaction because this company benefits when there's trading volume, and being within this range is pretty bullish. One, and just the gyrations in the market guarantee a lot of trading volume, right? So why would that be bad for Coinbase? It's great for Coinbase. Right. So I think it was an overreaction, or maybe it was just people selling the news or hedging, or some other kind of reason like that. But it bounced a little bit today, and it looks like it's trading up another percent or two after hours, and I could see it retaking this high of this last week pretty easily if the crypto market continues to rally. It's much more dependent. Coinbase seems to be much more dependent on crypto prices, or at least in terms of how it trades, than is really reflected by where its earnings come from. Yeah, it is just like any broker. It's not going to do well in a bear market, but if it's in a kind of crypto markets in a general rally mode, in a bull market, and there's the gyrations, it's not just flat markets, that's the perfect market for a stock like Coinbase that's transaction driven primarily. They have other things, but it's still pretty much transaction driven. So I think it may be worth a trade, especially on if it pulls back a little bit on early this next week. It might be a good trade, a long trade. I wouldn't short this. I think it would be a mistake to short it. It's I think the crypto market's still in a bull mode, and although it's perfectly fine to be bearish or not be bullish on crypto at this point, I wouldn't short it. I wouldn't recommend anyone short it if that's what their stance is. Just stay flat. I don't think it can be a market that it's very irrational on the upside, and I wouldn't want to be caught short in a market like this.
Right. If we look at the Ethereum chart, this current rally is very similar to the rally into the last peak. It was just maybe slightly slower, but it's similar to the previous rally when it rallied into the peak 4,400 last time.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, that's and so it's a little concerning that there is not much back and forth trading, and it's just all in one straight line.
I would say though that this was driven by this rally. Unlike this rally was driven by what the future was. This rally was driven by some fundamentals. And what happened here was what's called the London upgrade. And so that resulted in several proposals going into place, and there was a hard fork, but there wasn't an alternative fork that lived. But basically, Ethereum got completely upgraded. And one of the things that changed was what's called EIP 1559. And this was quite a radical change to how fees are calculated for Ethereum. One, it makes fees more stable over time. So there was a lot of fluctuation and variation in fees, and this created problems. Like institutions and so on wanted to get involved in. Okay, so one of the features of EIP 1559 is what's called a fee burn. And so since this went in place on a week ago Wednesday, so 9 days ago, there's been $129 million of Ethereum that's been burned, which means destroyed. So what's happened is so 39,000 Ethereum, Ether have been burned since that time. So what that means is over 9 days, about 3.5 days of new issuance has been destroyed, which means that the rate of inflation for Ethereum is reduced by something like 40%. And when the merge goes into place, which means Ethereum converts to a proof of stake, this burn, what it means is this burn will be even higher, and Ethereum will in fact become deflationary at that point. So that is a big reason for the rally that we're seeing. That, and there's two reasons really. That one, when a miner, when they're mining transactions, if you're a miner, you're a business person. It's like you're running. If you've got like a rental house, you don't you collect rent and you use it to spend on whatever upkeep and so on, and then the rest of it is your income, whatever is left over, right? So you're not just going to let the money collect in a bank. You have to do something with it, right? And you have to take care of your property and so on. Well, the miners, they get Ether, and it ends up being something like 12,000 a day that they get, and or that's being issued, that's new, and they would have to sell that. Well, guess what? No, there's 40% less that's being issued, and they don't have it to sell. So there's less Ether being sold by miners to continue running their operations. One, and then so it just removes overhang, but it also reduces the supply, which is another bullish feature. So I think this is the big driver of the rally. Now, there's also just been a recovery in the market itself, and everything has rallied, not just Ether, but that's the reason why this has been such a relentless rally compared to something like Bitcoin, where if you look at it, it had some kind of zigzags on the way up, or even an ADA, where, well, that looks a lot more like it, but there again, it's sort of it's a lot of hype here, but it's some news as well. So that's I think there's a story behind the Ether rally that doesn't exist for Bitcoin. The thing that's bullish for Bitcoin is just I think it got oversold, and that accounts for some of it. but I think also the sense that it's the like infrastructure bill, these types of things, although it's negative for crypto, it's maybe not it's not the end of the world, and it could have been worse. And so I think that's part of what has resulted in it rallying a little bit further this week.
Right. And what was interesting about that hack that happened that we talked about of Poly, that the hackers apparently have returned all of the money and will get $500,000 in reward for finding the vulnerability, I guess. So that was all in good fun.
Well, they found out really quickly that their funds were being labeled as tainted, and that no one would accept them and no one would trade with them, and they couldn't exchange what they took on different exchanges and so on. They wouldn't allow them to do it. And then there was a firm that did some research and found they narrowed down who the people that could have done it were, and they published that. And I think it got a little too close to home, and so they realized it was in their interest to return it and to, as you say, collect a reward that wasn't anything close to what they stole, but still it was
better than nothing.
Yeah, well, they I guess what they they call it a consulting fee or something. We help them improve their security. But firms do that all the time. They would hire some, a black hat type hacker to try to break into their systems or violate the security of their systems, and they'll pay them something very similar to that, because that's it's better to pay them legitimately than to have them do something illegal or that hurts their customers or whatever.
Yeah. What was also interesting, there was not much news coming from El Salvador as their deadline of September 7th looms. So they have less than a month left. Will be interesting to see how that plays out.
Yeah, I haven't heard any news either, and I assume it's still green light, and they're still going to do it. There are several other Latin American countries that have talked about adopting something like this too. And I wouldn't be surprised if there are some others that announce that they accept Bitcoin or other crypto as legal tender in their future. There's part of what I think has happened is that as we just spent the first 10-15 minutes talking about, as the United States position in the world weakens, there are more countries that are willing to kind of step up and not be observing dollar supremacy any longer. And that's not really a good thing for the United States, but it could be a very good thing for crypto. Whether or not it's good as an investor, that's where there's an opportunity there, I think.
And today's spike in crypto happened right after JP Morgan said that there are signs that institutional demand is rising. So
it's such a change from even 2 years ago when Jamie Dimon labeling it a scam and so on. Well, now they're equipped to help clients get access to it and sell them crypto and help them manage their positions and custody their positions. And so now that they're all set up for that, it's a valid alternative asset class, right? So,
exactly.
But I think this is just one more step in adoption. There's been some Goldman Sachs has their own trading desk that they brought back this year. That they got rid of back in, I want to say 2019. They brought it back this year, and they've written a number of different papers for clients that have been pretty bullish and actually also pretty have a pretty sophisticated understanding, not just at a at a basic level, which is what was very common in the past, that they would have just a very rudimentary understanding of what the real drivers in the market were. And now they seem to have a much better understanding of what's going on. And so it will change the character of this market. I think for the better. It'll end up trading more like other markets, but it may take some of the excitement out in the long run too, that because prices will be a little bit more rational.
All right, that's it for me for today.
Well, thanks everyone, and have a good weekend.
Thank you, Andy.